So the road to remission with IBD can be challenging, and in this video I'm going to be sharing my personal experience with failing Remicade Biologic therapy and then losing a significant chunk of my symptom progression progress due to a C-Diff infection, a lovely little combination that put me back in the hospital for about a week. So that was fun, and that's what we're going to talk about. Hey, what's up? My name is Austin. I'm 23 years old. I'm a full-time grad student, and about 2.5 months ago, I was diagnosed with moderate to severe pan-ulcerative colitis, and now I'm making a video series about my life with IBD to share with you all. So if you want to hang out more, you can check out more videos on my channel or click on the playlist link in the description down below. All right, so let's get started with the video. In brief, I had minor symptoms of UC undiagnosed for probably a year. Then in October of 2020, I got COVID, and this just obliterated my stomach. And it's my theory that it altered my immune system and my gut microbiome to the point where it just kind of kicked in, the full-fledged autoimmune malfunction that is ulcerative colitis. In November, I spent 12 days in the hospital in pretty critical condition, and I was started on Remicade as a rescue treatment after a really weak response to corticosteroids. They just weren't working for me, and so something had to change, or else we were approaching that margin where colon surgery was being brought into question. After leaving the hospital, I had a total of 2 Remicade infusions. I was on an accelerated schedule because of how critical my condition was, and I have a video about what that experience was like, so you can check that out as well if you're curious. And during week 3, I started to see some improvements in my UC symptoms overall. There was a reduction in cramping, there was a lower volume of blood, I was having longer periods of time during the day where I could go without having a bowel movement, so things seemed like they were trending up a little bit, but it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what was going on. During this time, I was still on a 30 to 20 milligram regimen of prednisone. I was figuring out my diet, and at this point, my doctor had recommended a reduction in fiber to like 5 grams or less, and so I cut my fiber intake in half, and I had less stress in my life going on, so why exactly my symptoms were improving was unclear. However, while my symptoms were improving, the amount of Remicade in my system should have dictated a much further progression in getting into remission, and I was just not at a point where the Remicade seemed to be working. And around week 4, things kind of started going downhill again, symptom-wise. So I met with my doctor, and during this meeting, it was concluded that, the Remicade therapy was a failure, and we would be moving to something a little heavier. And so it was suggested that Xeljanz, which is also a pretty strong immunosuppressant, would be the next option. But before I could get started on that, I would have to get some blood tests just to make sure my hemoglobin was at a level to where, it was safe for me to get started on this transitioning to this next therapy. And as you can imagine where the story goes, hemoglobin was way low. So on New Year's Eve, I packed up my bags and I headed over to the hospital for what I thought was just going to be a 2-day stay where I would hang out, get some blood transfusion, get a few blood tests done, and then be on my merry way. You might think that being in the hospital on New Year's Eve was kind of a bummer. This was 2020, and so there wasn't a lot going on, and I have UC, so I didn't have big plans for the evening as it was. Cool silver lining though, where we were in the hospital had a panoramic view, and tons of people were firing off fireworks, so I saw like a ton of fireworks, so it wasn't that bad. However, the celebratory atmosphere didn't last long because the C-Diff test that I had gotten earlier in the day, the results had come back, and I was informed that they were positive, and C-Diff complicates things a little bit. So Clostridioides difficile, I think that's how it's pronounced, is a very contagious bacterial infection that can cause severe diarrhea and colitis. Overall, C-Diff is not something you want to get as someone with ulcerative colitis because it just kind of mimics a lot of the stuff that ulcerative colitis is already doing, and so it's simply no fun. And you have to be super careful with C. diff to not spread it to other people and also to not reinfect yourself. So what I found pretty interesting is that some people actually naturally carry the C. diff bacteria in their large intestine, but the colonies are small enough and there's enough other good bacteria to where they don't experience any of like the symptoms of having an infection. But if something does throw off the good bacteria, like someone's on an antibiotic, then that's when the C. diff colonies can kind of grow out of control, and that's when like C. diff becomes a problem. Anyways, to fight a C. diff infection, you take a specific antibiotic, and the one that I was put on is called vancomycin. I'm actually still on it, but I'm at a much lower dose, and I'm still tapering off. The docs just wanted to make sure that it was out of my system and that I was going to be C. diff free for the rest of this recovery process. All right, so now we're going to shift things back to my time in the hospital. So there I am. My UC symptoms are worse. I have a C. diff infection. I am still on corticosteroids. My inflammation levels, my C-reactive proteins are up again, and my hemoglobin is still pretty low, and I'm losing blood every single day. So that's where we're at with things. Not a great outlook, but I guess a hospital is a good place to be if that's the condition that you're in. So this is the first night still, and I signed some paperwork acknowledging that I accept the risks of receiving a blood transfusion, and later that night I do get the blood. I'm feeling much better the next day. My hemoglobin is up. So they put me on the antibiotic vancomycin to deal with the C. diff, as I mentioned, and the rest of my stay is basically just kind of monitoring to make sure that my symptoms are improving over the course of the next few days as the antibiotic works to fight the infection. So the only other big event during my stay at the hospital was a sigmoidoscopy, and for those of you who don't know, it's similar to a colonoscopy, except that it's less invasive, it takes less prep work, and it's only viewing a smaller part of the colon that's right past the rectum, called the sigmoid colon, aptly named. And luckily this time I was able to get anesthesia, and so I was put under for the operation, because the last time I was in the hospital that was not the case, and that was an interesting experience that I will talk about in another video altogether. Things continue to improve, and by day 7 I was stable enough to discharge, and that ended my stay at the hospital for round number 2. I will say, however, it was kind of cool to see all of the nurses on the floor again. I mean, by this point I had built, some pretty strong rapport, and I was feeling like a real regular at that place, which is probably not what you want in life, to be a regular at a hospital, but it's the little things in life. So I would say psychologically, this part of the journey was extremely challenging for me, just having all these things stack up at once, and also having, Remicade. Like, I was really hoping that it was going to be, the silver bullet for me that was going to put me in remission, and it wasn't, and I was back in the hospital. And so there were days that I really did feel defeated during this time. And of course it's normal to feel that. It's normal to have days where you kind of like losing hope might be a little extreme, but it's just like, it's so frustrating to not be going in the direction that you want to be going. However, I will say that, keeping my wits about me and keeping a positive attitude has really been the cornerstone of this journey for me. You have to take it day by day, and it is frustrating, and I'm not perfect. There are days where I get so anxious and stress myself out so much just because I want to be better. I don't want to have this life, but here we are, c'est la vie, and I really do believe that, attitude has actual physiological consequences when it comes to this healing process. So if you're in a position where things are not working out, you've hit the wall, maybe you got C. diff, and there's more things stacking up, your treatment isn't working, there are more days to come, and they're probably going to be better. So hang in there and keep staying positive. I think it's really that simple, even though it's hard. Thank you for watching. My name is Austin. This is Otter Space Productions. And if you yourself are, you have IBD and you're on the road to remission, it is my most earnest recommendation that despite all the cute nurses and cool socks that you might get, you avoid the route that I took. Don't get C. diff, don't go back to the hospital, and stay positive, and I will see you in the next video. So take care.